Okay, for this video, we're going to tie a foam salmon fly, the largest stonefly species out there. And this is a fly that floats really well, and sometimes it's a little bit wind resistant when you're casting it, but makes a lot of noise when it hits the water. And sometimes that's just what you're looking for when you're fishing those big salmon flies. So we're going to start off with by getting my thread on the hook. So I'm just going to take some black thread. I generally tie with most of my flies with black thread. I probably could use a color that is more closely similar to the color of stoneflies and salmon flies, but black seems to work well. So that's what I'm going to use. So I'm just going to get my thread on there. And then for this fly, we're going to use some foam that is actually, it's round foam, closed cell foam, and pretty simple fly. We're just going to tie it in a couple spots, and actually in one spot, and that'll be good. So to start off with, I like to add a little bit of dubbing to right at the spot where I'm going to tie this fly onto the hook. I've noticed that if I don't do that, that the fly tends to want to spin on me on this hook. So I just put a little bit of dubbing on here. I like to get it nice and tight. So use black. Get some black dubbing. Get it nice and tight to the thread. At times I've used a dubbing loop, but most of the time I generally just get it as tight as I can just by spinning it on the thread. So, okay, it looks pretty good. Okay, we've got our little bit of dubbing right there. That's going to hopefully hold this fly a little bit better. I'm going to take my round orange foam, stick it right there. The head is about the same length as where the eyelet is, maybe just a bit back from there. And my first wrap is somewhat loose until I get all the way around. And then once I get all the way around this foam, I really cinch it down. You can kind of see it starting to cinch down a little bit. Really got to get those first few wraps nice and tight. That's critical. So I'm using some pretty strong thread. I like to use unwaxed unithread, or a lot of times I'll use the unwaxed floss. It just tends to hold a lot better on these flies. Okay, that's holding pretty good. All right, so we've got that on there. Next thing I like to tie in is I use a little bit of web wing. This is just kind of a synthetic material. It's got the little dark spots on it, but it just kind of imitates the wings of a stonefly. Sometimes I'll use it for grasshopper. Works well for this fly. So I'm going to cut myself a little strip of that. There's my web wing. We're just going to tie that in right on top. Whoop. Just like that. And that synthetic material sometimes it tends to bunch up down where you've tied it in. It doesn't seem to mind. I don't seem to mind that. I just get as many wraps as I can to kind of hide it and get a nice base right there, because we're going to tie in a little bit of elk hair here on the back. And so, like I said, next step is we're going to put some elk hair right there. Now with this fly, a lot of times you don't need a lot of elk hair. It's because it's going to float regardless of how much elk hair is on it. So I usually go with a little bit less. Once I snip the elk hair, I like to get that fuzzy stuff right there at the base of the elk hair pulled out allows me to fasten that elk hair a little bit tighter to the foam. Okay, so we're going to stack it. I'm going to stick the elk hair in the hair stacker. Give it a few taps. All right, I'm going to place that right on top of the hook. And a lot of times I can't quite get it as long as this fly. For one, we're going to trim this. So I get it as long as I can. I'm going to use my left hand to hold it right where I want it. So I want it right on top of that fly. My first wrap is relatively soft. Notice that the elk hair hasn't flared at all. So I go my first wrap real light. Then when I get to my second wrap, that's when I pull tight. You can see that elk hair flare up pretty good. So once it flares, then I'm going to do some successive wraps working back. And you can see that I'm holding pretty tight to this fly. If you don't tie things in nice and tight on this fly, everything kind of starts to get away from you. And it'll start to wrap around this hook. So, all right. That's looking pretty good. Again, this is the stuff I want. This is the stuff that I don't want. So I'm going to try to reach down in there. Don't have a lot to grab onto. I'm going to try to use these needle nose scissors and snip the elk hair that I don't want. There we go. Okay. So I like to have rubber legs on most of my flies that I fish dry fly. I think it gives it a little bit more realistic look. So we're going to tie in a couple of rubber legs here. Generally I use white. I'm going to snip this about 1.5 inch strip of rubber legs. And if you notice, there's actually 2 of them attached together. I like to tie them in while they're still attached. It makes it easier to work with. So I get it tied in. About 3 or 4 soft wraps. Those were not very tight wraps. Just do those so I can fasten it to where I want it. Then I'm going to take my scissors here. I'm going to split these rubber legs right where they've been attached and pull up. So now I've got 4. Grab these, and I grab these, pull them down to the side, and your rubber legs are right where you want them. So, just about done. The last thing that I like to do on this fly is, this elk hair tends to flare up pretty good because if you notice, we're recessed pretty good in there because of how tightly we tied that. So I like to put a little topper on there, and what that topper will do is it'll tame this elk hair down a little bit. So, sticking with the same color we're using, this is a pretty bright fly. We're going to take a little orange piece of foam and I'm going to put it right on top where the elk hair is. Tie it in pretty light, pretty loose. Get 3 or 4 wraps. It'll hold where it's at. And once I get it in, then I'm going to take my whip finisher and I'll be whip finishing this fly. I like to whip finish before I snip the orange topper, as the thread likes to settle down in the appropriate spot better when it hasn't been snipped yet. So there we go. Whip finish it, snip that thread. These are a little long, so whoop, scissors aren't working good. Snip that. All right. So this is a pretty large version of a salmon fly. One thing I've got to do is I need to work my web wing a little bit here, as it needs to be formed. So I'll probably cut that web wing, give it a little bit more of the shape of what a salmon fly wing would look like. There we go. That foam isn't laying straight, but Okay, so that's the round foam salmon fly. Floats really well. I would like to say it casts well, but it's not a great caster. You gotta put a little bit of muscle and a little bit of double haul into the cast because of this right here. This catches a lot of air. But when it's on the water, man, it'll make a little bit of noise and catch a lot of fish before you have to replace this fly. So, foam salmon fly.